It's a busy street in the middle of the day. Cars rush past. People walk by. And right there on the sidewalk, a man collapses, clutching his chest. Another figure stands over him, holding something in his hand. Not one person steps in. Not one person calls out. And in less than 20 seconds, it's over. But what happened next shocked everyone. This is Crown Street, a lively corner of downtown Melbourne. Cafes hum with conversation. The air smells faintly of roasted coffee beans, and the sound of buskers drifts from the plaza. Our victim, 43-year-old David Keller, is a father of two, a small business owner, and according to friends, the kind of guy who would help anyone. The suspected killer, still walking free, at least for now. Witnesses remember seeing a man in a gray hoodie, moving like he had somewhere urgent to be. This is where it all unfolded, in broad daylight, in front of more than a dozen people, and for reasons no one can quite explain, a single one intervened. We post daily. Subscribe so you never miss a case. David Keller wasn't the type of man who drew trouble, at least, not the David most people knew. To his neighbors, he was the friendly baker with a warm smile, a man who always had flour dusting his forearms and a fresh loaf ready for anyone who walked in. To his family, he was a devoted husband to Melissa and a doting father to their two children, 9-year-old Sophie and 6-year-old Liam. Keller's Bread and Bean sat on the corner of Crown Street and Maple Avenue. It had been his pride for over a decade, a place where morning commuters grabbed coffee and retirees lingered over pastries. The shop smelled of cinnamon and yeast, a scent David believed could make anyone feel at home. But 8 months before his death, the cracks began to show. A corporate coffee chain opened just 2 blocks away, with glossy signage, cheaper prices, and a marketing budget David couldn't compete with. His regulars dwindled. The warm chatter inside the shop quieted. Melissa noticed the way he stared too long at the monthly accounts, his lips pressed tight. Still, David kept up appearances. He unlocked the shop at a.m., lights flicking on against the dark, the ovens heating until the whole street smelled like freshly baked bread. He still smiled at customers, still joked with Sophie when she popped in after school, but privately, something weighed on him. Police would later find a small stack of envelopes hidden in the back of his office drawer. No return address, no handwriting, just typed, black letters on plain white paper. Most were short. All were unsettling. You know what you did. Payback is coming. This won't end until it ends. There was no record that David had ever reported them. Melissa claimed she'd never seen them before. Friends said he never mentioned feeling unsafe. That secrecy would become one of the case's deepest mysteries. Through the winter, strange incidents started to occur. Once, Melissa found David sitting alone in the dark kitchen, his knuckles raw and scraped. He told her it was nothing, just a minor scuffle outside the shop when he confronted a drunk customer. She didn't push for details, but something about the way he avoided her eyes stayed with her. Neighbors began to notice a silver sedan with tinted windows parked across the street from the bakery. Some mornings it idled for hours, engine humming softly. Other days, it appeared for just minutes, then vanished. No one ever saw who drove it. And whenever someone approached, it pulled away. David also became more watchful. CCTV from the bakery would later show him glancing toward the street repeatedly during his shifts, as though checking for something or someone. By early spring, his mood had changed. He was quieter, sometimes distracted during conversations. Melissa recalled him taking phone calls in the pantry, speaking in low tones before hanging up abruptly if anyone walked in. On March 14th, just 3 days before his death, Melissa remembered a tense dinner. David barely touched his food. Sophie asked if something was wrong, and he smiled, but it was the kind of smile meant to end questions, not answer them. The next morning, he left for work earlier than usual. At 4:45 a.m., before the streets were fully awake, he was seen walking quickly toward the shop. CCTV caught him pausing briefly at the corner, scanning the road, then disappearing inside. Later that day, he confided in his assistant baker, a 22-year-old named Ella. that he was thinking about closing up for a while. When she asked if it was about money, he said something like that and changed the subject. March 17th began like any other. At a.m., David opened the bakery. By 9 a.m., the display cases were lined with croissants, baguettes, and his signature almond tarts. Customers trickled in, and the street outside bustled with weekday rhythm cars rolling over the cobblestones, cyclists weaving between pedestrians. But even that morning, David seemed preoccupied. Ella later testified that he kept checking his watch, glancing toward the front door, and once muttering under his breath, "Let's get this over with." Around 12:45 p.m., Melissa called to ask if H'd be home for dinner. He told her he wasn't sure. He might have something to deal with. She asked what he meant, but he quickly changed the subject to Sophie's school project. By 1:10 p.m., the lunch rush had passed. Ella began cleaning the counters, and David stepped into the back to grab his jacket. Moments later, he emerged, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. He told Ella he was going for his lunch break and would be back in half an hour. He walked east along Crown Street, passing shopfronts gleaming under the midday sun. A busker played guitar near the plaza, the melody carrying faintly in the air. David sipped his coffee, glancing at his phone. He didn't seem to notice the figure several paces behind him, gray hoodie pulled low, hands in pockets. At the corner, David stopped to wait for the pedestrian light. The hooded figure paused too, half a step back, gaze fixed on him. The light changed. They crossed together, blending into the lunchtime crowd. It would later become clear that David wasn't just going for lunch. He had a meeting planned, one he hadn't told anyone about. Police found a text on his phone, sent that morning. "Meet at the usual spot. We settled this today." The number was unregistered, and the message had been deleted, then recovered during forensic analysis. The usual spot, investigators later learned, was a narrow laneway just off Crown Street, tucked between an art supply store and a shuttered bar. At 1:22 p.m., CCTV captured David turning into that lane. The figure in the hoodie followed. Neither would be seen on camera again for the next 90 seconds. 90 seconds that changed everything. The laneway was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Old brick walls loomed on either side, graffiti curling across their surfaces. The air was cooler here, the sound of the busy street fading into a muffled hum. At 1:23 p.m., a security camera from the back of the art supply store caught the first flicker of movement. David stepped into frame, coffee still in hand, phone tucked into his jacket pocket. He slowed, glancing over his shoulder. The man in the gray hoodie followed, his stride measured. His right hand stayed buried in the pocket of his sweatshirt. David said something, his lips moving quickly. The hooded man took another step forward. David raised his free hand, palm out, as if to calm the situation. What happened next unfolded in seconds. The suspect lunged. David staggered back, his coffee spilling across the pavement in a brown arc. A flash of metal appeared in the hooded man's hand. He drove it forward once, twice, 3 times, each motion sharp and deliberate. David's gasp echoed faintly in the microphone of the nearby security camera. He clutched his chest, eyes wide, knees buckling. The hooded man stepped closer, almost leaning in, as if to say something. Then he pulled back and turned to leave. It was 1:24 p.m. The entire attack lasted less than 15 seconds. David collapsed onto the cold, stained concrete. His phone slid from his pocket, clattering against the wall. He tried to reach for it, but his fingers shook, scraping against the ground. Meanwhile, just beyond the lane's entrance, people passed without looking in. One witness later told police she thought she'd heard someone arguing, but didn't want to get involved. Another, a delivery driver, glanced down the lane, saw 2 men standing, and assumed it was nothing. Inside the bakery, Ella checked the time. David had only been gone about 15 minutes. She began to restock the bread counter, unaware that her boss was lying less than 100 meters away, bleeding onto the pavement. At 1:25 p.m., the hooded man emerged from the laneway, walking quickly but not running. He blended into the crowd within seconds. The silver sedan that had been spotted near the bakery in previous weeks was parked half a block away. CCTV would later capture the man opening the passenger door, slipping inside, and the car pulling out into traffic. Back in the lane, David's breathing grew shallow. His lips moved quiet, broken words, but there was no one there to hear them. It wasn't until 1:27 p.m. that someone finally stepped inside. A university student named Mia, walking to her afternoon class, spotted the coffee cup on its side and a pair of legs visible from the street. She approached cautiously, realizing what she was seeing only when she saw the blood. She froze for a second. Then she dropped her bag and pulled out her phone. "There's a man here, he's bleeding, please. Send help," she told the 000 operator, her voice shaking. The call was logged at 1:28 p.m. Paramedics were dispatched immediately. Mia knelt beside David, trying to keep him conscious. She asked his name. He whispered it. She told him help was on the way, but his eyelids kept fluttering. By the time the ambulance arrived at 1:33 p.m., David's pulse was faint. Blood pooled beneath him, dark against the concrete. Paramedics worked quickly, applying pressure to the wounds, loading him onto a stretcher. One of them, later interviewed by investigators, said David's last audible words were, "Tell Melissa." They didn't make it to the hospital before his heart stopped. Word spread fast. By 2 p.m., Crown Street was cordoned off with yellow police tape. Officers canvassed the area, speaking to shop owners and passersby. The laneway became a focal point, forensic officers photographing every stain, every discarded object. Detective Sergeant Alan Reeves, leading the investigation, was struck by the precision of the attack. "This wasn't random," he told reporters later. "The killer knew exactly where and when to strike." CCTV footage from nearby businesses was pulled within the hour. The grainy clip showing the gray-hooded man following David was replayed over and over in the incident room. But his face was obscured, head tilted down, hood drawn tight. At 3:15 p.m., Melissa arrived at the scene. She'd been called by police, but given few details. When she saw the stretcher being loaded into the ambulance, already draped, she broke down. Officers had to lead her away from the crowd of onlookers and media gathering at the barricade. Witness statements trickled in. Most people hadn't noticed anything until after the attack. A few recalled seeing the suspect earlier that day, but descriptions varied. Some said he was tall and thin, others average build. One person claimed they saw him talking to David earlier in the week. The silver sedan came up in multiple accounts. A bakery customer reported seeing it idling near the shop that morning. Same tinted windows. Same slow, deliberate departures when approached. By evening, the footage of the attack, edited to blur the most graphic moments, was released to the public in hopes of identifying the suspect. The video ignited outrage. Viewers were horrified not just by the brazenness of the killing, but by how many people walked by without stepping in. Social media boiled with debate. Was it fear, shock, or indifference that kept bystanders silent? Melissa issued a statement the next day. "David was a good man. He didn't deserve to die alone in the street. Someone out there knows who did this. Please, come forward." As night fell over Melbourne that day, Crown Street felt different. The calf chatter was muted. The busker didn't return. People glanced over their shoulders more often. And somewhere out there, the man in the gray hoodie and whoever drove that silver sedan was still free. The investigation was only beginning. But for the detectives on the case, one thing was already clear. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a message, and David Keller had been the intended recipient. The first 48 hours after David Keller's murder were a blur of leads, interviews, and dead ends. Detective Sergeant Alan Reeves knew the clock was ticking. If the killer wasn't caught quickly, the trail would grow cold. The crime scene team finished processing the laneway late that night. 3 distinct footprints were lifted from the damp concrete. 2 belonging to David, 1 matching a sports shoe, size 11, consistent with the suspect's build. A partial fingerprint was found on the discarded coffee cup, though it turned out to be David's. No weapon was recovered. The CCTV trail became the team's primary focus. They mapped the suspect's movements from the bakery to the lane, frame by frame. The gray hoodie was generic, but investigators noted a small tear on the left sleeve. The man's posture was distinctive, shoulders slightly hunched, right foot turning outward with each step. These details were sent to uniformed officers across Melbourne with instructions to be on the lookout. By midday on March 18th, the silver sedan was identified as a 2010 Holden Commodore, metallic gray, with aftermarket black rims. The plates were stolen. Forensics swabbed the lane for DNA, recovering a partial profile from a droplet of blood near the wall, likely from the attacker during the struggle. Interviews with locals produced conflicting accounts. One witness swore she had seen the suspect a week earlier outside the bakery arguing with David. Another claimed he recognized the man as someone who hangs around the shipping yard a few miles away. Reeves sent a team to canvass that area, but no one matching the description was found. Then came the first twist. Melissa, still reeling from the shock, agreed to a formal statement. In the interview room, she hesitated before revealing something she'd kept to herself. 2 months ago, she'd answered the bakery phone and heard a man's voice. "Tell David he owes me, and I always collect." The call had ended before she could respond. She didn't recognize the voice, but the tone was cold, deliberate. That statement shifted the investigation's focus. Detectives began digging into David's financials. Bank records revealed 2 sizable withdrawals in cash, $15,000 each, made within the last 6 months. The amounts didn't correspond to any known business expenses. When they checked his personal account, they found another withdrawal of $5,000 just 2 weeks before his death. Reeves suspected extortion. By the second day, investigators uncovered another lead: the threatening letters found in David's office. Forensic analysis determined they'd been printed on a common home inkjet, no fingerprints, no traceable paper source. But one envelope were faint impressions of numbers, possibly from resting on top of another sheet while writing. Enhanced imaging revealed a partial sequence, 4,389. It wasn't much, but it could be part of a phone number, a street address, or a bank account. But then something unexpected happened. At 3:42 p.m. on March 19th, a man walked into the Crown Street police station. Mid-30s, weary build, nervous. He identified himself as Michael Vance, a part-time delivery driver. He claimed H'd been making a drop-off nearby the day of the murder and saw the gray-hooded man exit the lane. "He looked right at me," Vance said, "and I swear I've seen him before at a card game, maybe 6 months ago." Pressed for details, Vance recalled the man being called Gordo by others at the table. He didn't know his real name, but believed he was connected to an underground gambling ring. This tip fit with the theory of debt or extortion. Detectives shifted resources toward identifying Gordo. Surveillance of known gambling dens in Melbourne began that same night. Undercover officers frequented the establishments, asking quiet questions. Meanwhile, the DNA sample from the crime scene returned a partial match, enough to suggest the suspect had a prior criminal record, but not enough to pinpoint identity. It indicated the donor was likely male, aged between 28 and 38. Then, a break in the case. March 21st, 9:12 a.m. Officers spotted the silver sedan parked outside a storage unit facility on the outskirts of the city. They moved in. Inside the unit, they found the car, now without plates, and a pile of discarded clothing: black jeans, gloves, and the infamous gray hoodie with the tear in the left sleeve. Forensics confirmed it was the same hoodie from the CCTV. On the inner cuff, they found trace amounts of David's blood, and under the hood seam, several short, dark hairs. But the most chilling discovery was a small spiral notebook in the glove compartment of the car. Inside were names, half a dozen of them, each with a date and a number beside it. David's name was last on the list. Next to it, 3/17 paid in full. The other names became immediate priorities. Detectives began contacting them discreetly. 2 were missing persons. 1 had been found dead months earlier, ruled a suicide at the time. The pattern was emerging. This wasn't a single murder. This was part of a series. Despite the mounting evidence, Gordo remained elusive. Leads pointed toward a man named Gordon Pierce, a known enforcer for a small but violent debt collection network tied to illegal gambling. Pierce had prior convictions for assault and extortion, but had managed to avoid prison for the last 5 years. His last known address was vacant, his phone disconnected. Reeves held a press conference, releasing an updated image of the suspect, enhanced from CCTV and witness descriptions. The appeal worked. Tips poured in. One came from a bartender who said Pierce had been in his pub 2 nights after the murder, drinking heavily and boasting about settling scores. Armed with this, police obtained a warrant. On March 24th, they raided a rundown motel on the city's edge. Room 12 was registered under a fake name, but inside, they found clear evidence of Pierce's Stay Fast food wrappers, a half-empty bottle of whiskey, and a bag containing $8,000 in cash. But Pierce himself was gone. The investigation now had momentum, but also urgency. Reeves knew that the longer Pierce stayed at large, the greater the chance he'd disappear entirely or strike again. On March 26, detectives received another piece of the puzzle. A forensic accountant traced the 2 $15,000 withdrawals from David's business account to a casino in Sydney. Security footage there confirmed David's presence on both dates, always leaving with the same man at his side, Gordon Pierce. This revelation reframed everything. David's debt wasn't from his bakery, it came from gambling losses. Losses big enough to put him in Pierce's pocket. Losses he tried to pay off, but apparently not in full. By the end of that week, the case file on Pierce was thick with evidence, DNA links, witness statements, and financial trails, but he was still out there. And then, the phone rang. It was a private number. The voice on the other end was male, calm, almost taunting. "You're wasting your time, detective. Some people get what's coming to them. Keller did, and you'll never find me." The line went dead before Reeves could trace it. For the team, it was confirmation. Pierce was alive, watching the investigation, and confident enough to make contact. The hunt was no longer just about solving David Keller's murder. It was about stopping a man who made killing a business. And with every hour that passed, the danger grew. The taunting call hardened the team. Reeves knew bravado like that came from someone who felt untouchable. He decided to make Pierce grab something he couldn't resist: money. Detectives leaked, through a known intermediary, that Melissa had found one last envelope. David set aside cash he'd promised to pay if anything happened to him. The drop would be in the Crown Street laneway at dusk. A decoy bag, an undercover officer, a cell site simulator ready to catch any burner that pinged. They pushed the rumor by noon. By 4, an unlisted number texted the intermediary, "Tonight, same lane, alone." The hook was set. Dusk arrived slowly. The lane was a slit of fading blue between brick walls. An undercover stood where David fell, hoodie up, a bag at her feet. Reeves watched the monitors. Nobody moves until the handoff. At 6:18 p.m., a figure paused at the mouth of the lane. Hood up. He listened, then stepped in, right foot turning outward on each stride. He stopped 3 paces from the decoy. "You Keller's woman?" he asked. She didn't answer. She nudged the bag with her toe. "Stay," he said, and reached. Reeves gave the signal. Officers flowed from both ends, fast. The suspect spun, slipped on damp concrete, and went down. A cuff clicked home. The hood came off. Gordon Pierce. The simulator lit up and pointed nearby. A team moved on the source, a hatchback idling. Inside sat a driver and 2 phones. The license named him Owen Dyer, a mechanic with priors for plate theft. In the glove box lay a folded map with 3 circles: the bakery, the laneway, the storage unit, already raided. At the station, Pierce stared ahead. He asked for a lawyer and shut down. Dyer cracked first. He said H'd been paid cash to drive Pierce when needed and to swap plates. He swore he didn't know about a killing, only collection. Maybe, still enough. He placed Pierce in the car the day David died. Forensics tightened the chain. Hairs from the hoodie matched Pierce. The partial DNA from the lane hit on his record. Micro traces of David's blood were on the sole of a shoe found in Dyer's hatchback. In Pierce's pocket sat a plastic key. Officers traced it to a storage facility near the docks. Unit 27 held a hard case and a ledger. The case contained a folding knife with a broken tip. Under magnification, a tiny shard-matched metallic trace embedded in David's jacket. The ledger was worse. Names, dates, amounts, arrows linking debts to outcomes. At the bottom of several pages, a symboltwo slashes and a dot, and the initials B.R. Reeves had seen the symbol in an old gambling brief. It marked jobs brokered by a faceless middleman called the broker. Not a boss, a switchboard, the one who connected desperate debtors to violent collectors. Pressed again, Pierce finally spoke. Short answers, flat tone, he owed, he stalled. Orders are orders. Who gave the orders? A shrug. You don't meet the broker. You get a time, a place, a price. The case against Pierce was strong. The director of public prosecutions moved fast. Charges, murder, conspiracy, weapons. Dyer faced accessory and plate theft. The ledgers, other names pulled detectives into old files. 2 suicides now look staged. 1 bar fight read like a collection. Families were notified. A pattern emerged. Melissa attended every hearing. She wore black and held a small notebook she never opened. On arraignment day, she stood outside the courthouse. My husband made mistakes, she said. But he asked for help. He did not deserve to be executed in a lane while the world walked by. At trial, the footage played again. Jurors watched the gray figure follow, strike, leave. Witnesses traced the cars. Experts explained the shard, the blood, the DNA. The defense tried to fog the timeline and attack Dyer's credibility. It didn't land. After 6 days, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. Pierce didn't flinch. He received life. Dyer got 8 years. The city turned inward. Why didn't anyone step in? Why did it take 90 seconds to call? Debates flared online and on the street. A charity launched free bystander intervention training. The laneway became a memorial, chalk messages curling on brick. We saw. Well, act next time. Yet the ledger still bled questions. Who was Barr? What did the symbol mean? Why did the broker taunt police? An analyst cross-referenced the partial impression, 4,389, from the threat letter envelope with prepaid numbers activated near the storage sites. One account ended in 4389. Its activation ping matched a riverfront kiosk. Security footage showed a man in a ball cap buying the SIM. His face was shadowed, but a scar crossed his left eyebrow. A week later, the same man appeared, briefly, in casino footage speaking to a floor manager who once comped David's losses. Days after the murder, that manager flew overseas. He never came back. Reeves studied the city from the incident room window. Lights spread like stars. He had Pierce, he had Dyer, he had a knife, a notebook, a map with circles. But the mind holding the web together, the broker remained a voice on a phone and a mark on a page. He turned to the team. We closed the murder, he said. We didn't close the story. Melissa visited the lane one last time before moving with the children. She left an almond tart on the concrete, wrapped in wax paper. A note read, David, I'm sorry, didn't see sooner. Then she walked back into the light. As for Barr, the task force kept the file open. Tips trickled in. Most were noise. A few held shape. One pointed to a fixer who laundered debts through shell companies. Another to a retired bookmaker with a scar above his eye. Each lead spawned another. The truth may still be out there. If you know anything about B, R, the broker, or the network behind the ledger, tell us in the comments. Someone out there knows the missing piece. Someone always does. The murder of David Keller wasn't impulsive. Everything about it, location, timing, execution, points to predatory, organized aggression. In criminal psychology, this is known as instrumental violence, where the attack is not driven by sudden emotion, but by a calculated purpose. Pierce's choice of a public setting in broad daylight was deliberate. Psychologists call this the dominance display. It sends a message: I can end you, and no one will stop me. This aligns with enforcer psychology, where visibility is part of the intimidation. Such killers want witnesses not to the act itself, but to the effect. The brevity of the attack, 15 seconds, shows advanced situational control. No wasted motion, no hesitation. This is typical of repeat violent offenders who have learned to minimize their exposure while maximizing fear. Then there's the bystander effect. Psychologists have studied this for decades. The more witnesses present, the less likely any one person is to intervene. It's not always apathy, it's often diffusion of responsibility. People assume someone else will act, or they freeze under uncertainty. In this case, the attacker exploited that perfectly, knowing the crowd would do nothing until it was too late. The threatening letters, the gambling debts, and the ledger indicate coercive control. Patterns a psychological power game that doesn't stop with the victim. Networks like this use debt as a psychological leash, keeping people compliant through shame, fear, and perceived hopelessness. Pierce himself likely fits the profile of a high-functioning antisocial personality: low empathy, high tolerance for risk, comfort with deception, a transactional view of human life. His final taunting call to Detective Reeves was classic psychopathic narcissism, maintaining control over the narrative even after committing the crime. And then there's Barr, the so-called broker. The use of a middleman to distance themselves from the act points to someone with strategic criminal thinking, a manipulator who thrives on staying invisible, pulling strings through layers of deniability. The chilling truth: in cases like this, the murder itself is often not the final act. The psychological damage ripples through survivors, witnesses, and communities for years. Fear becomes the real weapon, and silence the killer's greatest ally. David Keller's story is more than a case file. It's a reminder of how quickly a life can be taken, even in the safety of daylight, and how fear can keep witnesses frozen in place. It's about a man who tried to protect his family from threats he thought he could handle, and the cost of silence when danger closes in. The trial gave Melissa and her children a measure of justice. But it didn't erase the bigger truth. Someone else, somewhere, is still pulling the strings. Barr is still out there, and David's name was just one in a ledger that may still be growing. His murder leaves behind more than grief. It leaves questions that refuse to rest, and a chilling awareness that the most dangerous people are often the ones we never see. Subscribe and watch our next case: the murder that vanished into thin air. It's a story that will make you question what's real and what's been erased. And tell me, if you had been there, in that crowded street, in those 90 seconds, would you have stepped forward or kept walking?